No. Now that's very fascinating when you think about it. This man, up to this point, has never seen Yeshua. He's felt his fingers in his thumbs or whatever he used there to anoint his eyes. He heard his voice. I'm sure he heard Yeshua talking to them, but he's never seen him. He didn't have sight until he went to the pool. He washed his eyes and now he could see for the first time in his life. Can you imagine that? The first time in his life. Hey, Chad, Jessica, nice to see you. We're in chapter 9 of the book of Yohanan, John. So we see this section of text. It starts out, right, with the Feast of Tabernacles still lingering in the background, all right? It's been a month and a half. Well, we don't know, all right? Hanukkah is coming up, the Feast of Dedication, and it comes up 2 months after the Feast of Tabernacles. And so it's before that and after the Feast of Tabernacles. It could be a day after. It could be a week. We don't know, but it's within that 2 month time frame, all right? But it's still present. That theme is still present of Yeshua being the light of the world, being the water that satisfies and quenches a man's thirst forever in the spiritual sense. The bread that came down from heaven, etc., right? But this chapter, this section of text, portrays what happens when the light shines. You see, when Yeshua's light shines, he's the light of the world, right? Some are made to see, like this man who was born blind, while others, and here's the sad thing, who think they see, they are actually the ones who are blinded, as it were, by the light. Blinded by the light. Who sang that? That's a great song. Blinded by the light. And then, by the way, one of the most controversial verses in all of music history. And I won't go into it. But in the event, it reminds us that all mankind is born in darkness. All mankind is born in spiritual darkness. And the only true light of the world is Yeshua, who is the light of the world. So this chapter, chapter 9, prepares the way for chapter 10. I mean, that's the way it works. There's no magic there, right? But in chapter 10, another contrast is going to be drawn between the good shepherd, who gives his life for his sheep, and the religious leaders who are nothing but thieves. And that contrast has already been brought up. You are not of your father from heaven. You are of your father the devil, he calls these leaders. So notice, as we've studied many times, contrast is a big part of it. So, as I said, the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, is coming up in this text where we are. Is coming up. In fact, it's coming up in today, in where we are today as well, here shortly in December, but what we call December. But the Feast of Dedication is between the Feast of 2 months after the Feast of Tabernacles, so somewhere in between there, right? All I'm saying is the time frame of this miracle we can pretty much pinpoint, right? So, again, as I said in my opening, I think I just mentioned this, but it's amazing, isn't it, that no one, I don't think, nobody ever got in as much trouble for doing good as Yeshua did. You know? I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. And that old saying, no good deed goes unpunished, no one lived it like Yeshua, you know? And I went into that earlier on. Probably don't need to go through it again. But it's true, right? Every time Yeshua helped somebody, he seemed to have gotten into serious difficulties with somebody on one side or another. And here we have the miracle of giving sight to a blind man. The man has never seen anything in his life. He has no conception of a tree or the sky. I mean, what a thought that is. And all of a sudden, he can see. Now, we don't know how old this man is. He's a man, and it's a male. It's in the masculine, and it's not a child, because there's another word that could have been used for child. So how old is he? We don't know. But however old he has never seen anything, including Yeshua. He's never seen Yeshua up to this point. I don't know, I just think it's interesting. This miracle is the only one, it's not the only one that's only in John, but this miracle is only in John. And it's interesting because what happened with the miracle and seeing again for this man is lost because of the controversy about when it was done and who did it and how this man could claim to be God. This man being Yeshua, right? But you remember the miracles that are recorded by John, right? This one's only recorded, and I just want you to just keep these in mind. These are the ones that are recorded by John, 7 of them, right? He turns water into wine. That's the first one, but he shows clearly he's the creator. He is the creator. He also heals the sick and the lame because he's the healer that's promised by all those previous prophets. He feeds the 5,000 as the provider. He walks on water as the creator and the one who upholds all things by the word of his power. He heals the blind, another reference to the prophets that had prophesied him, but also how he's the creator. I will show you that. It's amazing. And then, of course, he raises Lazarus again as something only God could do. So it's what John is always trying to show, as I said in my opening as well. Yeshua is God from the very opening line of his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Which precisely is what will get him into so much trouble. So this miracle is also unique in one very unique way. You know what it is? Anybody know what it is? Why it's so unique? I'll give you a second, and then I'll tell you. But when this man was healed, there were several different reactions. There was the reaction of the disciples that we saw, and they're primarily concerned with the question of where does this suffering come from? And that's a great concern. I think as a pastor, and I know this from my mentor, who taught me a lot, Pastor McLaughlin, and we would talk about it. I'm sure all the other pastors that he's ordained would agree with this statement. Probably one of the number one questions, one of the top ones we get, is why, and you probably get it as a Christian anyway, so why does God allow suffering? I mean, to be honest, I've asked that same question myself. Nobody knows the one thing that's unique about this miracle that's not in all 37 miracles that are recorded. We don't know about the millions of miracles he did, right? But the 37 that are recorded, this is the only miracle that cures something that was with the man, the person, from birth. From birth. All the other ones were added or given at some point in their life. Even the other blind had not been blind all of his life, but had become. So this is the only one. I think that's true. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, that was a thought I had. And it's also only covered by John, as I said. But that's not what makes it unique. But so when the disciples saw this poor man suffering, because, he was blind. And let's face it, blind in those days, you were probably left to depend on someone for your survival, right? And by the way, I don't even know if his parents were still supporting him. It's very weird. We're going to see their reaction later. But when the disciples saw this poor man suffering, they wanted to discuss the question. They were more concerned with the question of what causes his suffering than how can we help this man. But there was also another group who responded with pure emotion, because wherever Yeshua healed, there were no doubt those who were interested in the pure miracle. And they were interested in the miracle because they wanted a miracle, or they wanted to follow him for more miracles, or perhaps because of the miracle, like in this case, he had done something that the other group was against, and that being the Pharisees, as we discussed. So, the people knew this man, his neighbors, his friends. This is the guy. He sat at the corner of Plymouth Ave and whatever, and begged every day. There are places here very near my house, very strategic places because they're right at a stoplight, and there's the same people there. I don't know their names, and I've given them money if I happen to be. I don't go out of my way to do it, to be honest with you, because I've seen them take the money and go to Burger King, which is, I guess, is fine. I don't really care. I mean, where they go with it, but if I have to get, you'll pull up right next to them, and it's a very busy intersection, so you can't, it's not just hanging out. If the light is red and they're right there, it's kind of weird. I'm always like, all right, I don't mind, but I don't know if my heart's exactly in the right place. But I mean, I always tell them, God bless you, and I'll try to get some of a story from them, but it's only an interaction of a few minutes. But they're the same people. So I actually have learned a couple of things about them. Anyways, too much information. I'm sorry. Anyway, the people knew this man. They knew him. And now all of a sudden, something's changed. Now we can see. And so they're asking, isn't this the same guy? So I'm sure some said, that's great. And then some said, no, that's not him. Because how can you get cured from blindness? It can't be. It looks like him, but maybe it's his brother. I don't know what they were saying, but they were doubting, right? So why didn't they recognize him? I was wondering that. Because he's the same guy. And I was just thinking back to my experience with these people that are at these corners. And there's several of them, by the way. So it's like, 8, 9 places where you can get into that situation. But I was wondering what's different about him. But it was his eyes, Because don't you think that's true? The eyes are like the windows to the soul. I don't know who said that. Well, actually, Yeshua said it in Matthew, right? Remember, look it up. Well, you can have to Google it because I think it's during the Sermon on the Mount, but it's the eyes are like a lamp to the body or something. Remember? And anyways, I can't remember what it says. I shouldn't have brought it up, but they didn't recognize him because I think, right? You're seeing like a blind man. And their eyes are dull, or their eyes are closed. Why have them open? Or maybe he's wearing something. But now they're bright. And by the way, do you think he was given vision that was bad? No. He was given 20/20 vision. What's better than 20/20? I don't even know. Is that whatever it was better than 20/20. God restored, and it wasn't a restoration, it was a complete healing because he was born blind. That's what was so unique about this one. So they had seen this guy with these dull eyes or closed eyes all this time, and now he's wide open, and I'm sure he's taking in everything, right? But isn't it true that it's kind of representative, right, of someone who was, okay, so you get someone who's known to his friends, neighbors, family as someone living in a life of sin, right? A lifestyle of sin, whatever it is. And then the man or the woman becomes born again. And hopefully there is a change in their life. Maybe it's not as sudden as this, but it's kind of the same representative thing, right? I mean, all of a sudden they were in darkness and now they're born again. They're in the light. And there's something that comes over us. And people will say, is that the same guy or the same girl? They used to want to do this or that or the other thing. They used to talk this way, say that, whatever. I mean, hopefully there's a change, right? So what does Yeshua do? The Pharisees, by the way, the Pharisees had a long list of commandments you could not do on the Sabbath. They were the ones that they added. Okay, so I told you in the beginning, one was making ointment. You couldn't mix things. So what does Yeshua do? He mixes the ointment. He spits in the dust, he mixes it, and then he works on the Sabbath by doing that and anointing someone's eyes, which you couldn't do as well. So Yeshua heals the blind man, gave him sight. Gave him sight on the Sabbath. I mean, come on. You couldn't wait another day? I'm playing devil's advocate here. You know, the Pharisees were thinking probably, hey, man's been born that way. What's another day? But that was exactly the point. Yeshua said the Sabbath wasn't meant for God. You know, God took the rest, but he was giving it to us as a gift. So these Pharisees had that sort of closed-mindedness, you know. Regarding the Sabbath, they place so much importance on the Sabbath as to make this man, they would have said, it would have been fine if he just would have suffered for another day. But no, you had to do it on a Sabbath. And of course, claiming to be God, was another thing. And I'm not trying to take away the importance of the Sabbath day, my friends. But it was not to be a burden to man, but to provide rest for man. The Sabbath was not created for God, but by God, for man. And that's the one thing that's the thing about the 7 miracles. Why were there 7 done on a Sabbath? Why 7? They're not the ones they're not all mentioned in the book of John. There were 7 miracles for John, but it's the number of completion. It's the number of rest. And the 7 that were done on the Sabbath was to say, I am the rest. I am the Sabbath. Yeshua said, I am the Sabbath. Rest in me. Not to take away from taking a day, a week, one day. I mean, I think we should live in it every day. We should live every day as unto the Lord. So I don't badmouth the Sabbath at all. You want to do it on a Saturday, that's fine. I know people beat me up for that, but so be it, I guess. But in Mark chapter 2, Yeshua himself said, the Sabbath was made for man. I mean, there was this opportunity to say, the Sabbath was made for me. Now you better do all these lists. But no, he said the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. Therefore, look at this statement. You can pick it apart in the Greek. I can read it to you in Greek. Maybe not perfect Greek. I'm not saying I'm a Greek scholar, please. But therefore, the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath. And I've told you this before. I watch many debates and many discussions from people, Orthodox Jews, and many of them will tell you what's the most important holy day, and they will tell you it's the Sabbath. It's the Sabbath. And there are places in Israel where you can't drive your car and the shops closed. Is that a burden? Or was it for man? or a burden to man? That's the question. Anyways, back to chapter 9. Let's cover those verses again. Now, as Yeshua passed by, he saw this man who was blind from birth. Harao, as I said, saw, he perceived him, he knew something was going on. And this was not a glance and walk by, right? And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, Rabboni, teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Apparently, again, as I said, the man was known for that. This is probably what he'd been reduced to, begging. It's speculation on my part. But the disciples assumed, like most Jews of the day, that, and still many to this day, that sin and suffering are intimately connected. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a connection. Sin has its pleasures for a day, but also there are consequences to sin. So in one sense, that's certainly true, right? I mean, but here, we're all fallen creatures from the action of the very first couple back in Genesis chapter 3. So because he was born blind, it was assumed that he either sinned in the womb, which was regarded as possible, or his parents sinned in some way that implicated him. Like, for example, it was known that, or believed, that when a pregnant woman worshipped in a pagan temple, and they could actually dedicate the unborn to a false god, well, that fetus was regarded as participating in the pagan ritual. And, of course, that, if anything happened to, was the fetus was born, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion there. But Yeshua doesn't dwell on the theological question, but rather he gets right to helping the man, right? Which is I'm going to heal this man. This man's going to see because I'm the light of the world. And the disciples wondered if he'd actually sinned before he was born. When I first, people read over that and they skip right over it, but that's quite a thing to think about, right? But it was believed that blindness, such a disaster as that, being born that way, was the result. Sin had something. We remember Job's friends, because Job wasn't born that way, but when Job started having all these troubles, that's what his friends said. Man, what are you doing? You're sinning. You must be sinning up a storm, right? So it's kind of weird, but some of the Jews believed that there was some sort of reincarnation. As I said, it was kind of in this mysticism thing. It was not mainstream Jewish thought or teaching. It doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah. I'm not accusing of that, but kind of interesting, right? But thankfully, Yeshua puts a rest to all of that, and he says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. But this is the way it is, that the works of God should be revealed in him. And I must work the works of him who sent me while it's day. The night's coming when no one can work. And, it's a reference to several things, but it's a reference to, I've got to do the work when it's available. I've got to do the work when I come upon it. The Sabbath's not going to stand in the way of me doing my Father's will. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. The disciples of Yeshua were faced with a question that had to do with the nature of human suffering in general, as illustrated by the suffering of this blind man in particular. It's interesting. It's interesting, as I said, that the disciples had narrowed things down, right? I mean, they had the answer, but not quite the exact answer. But they were basically saying to Yeshua, look, we figured this thing out. This man's blind. He's been blind from birth. So we figured it out. It's either he that sinned or his parents. Which one was it? We almost got it figured out. All we need is a little help from you, Yeshua. And Yeshua flips the tables and says it's neither one of them. And I want to say, he said, you idiots. But I'm not. I would ad-lib that, and that's not the way it is at all, probably. But Yeshua replies it's something that they haven't even considered, right? It's not because of his sins or his parents' sins, but the power of God should be seen in him. Now listen, there are birth defects. There are issues that can result from the behavior of the parents, right? Now, I know it gets into a little sticky wicket there, if you will, about God's will and the different kinds of will and all of that. But look, I mean, if you, I know people in the healthcare field, and they have taken care of crack babies, right? Babies born addicted to crack because the mother. So, and that's just like a situation that comes to my mind for a couple of reasons, because I know somebody who had to experience that as a nurse that I recently met, and was telling me what one of the reasons she went into that field. But in any event, there are other things. Genetics, I guess, might not quite enter in. What else? I mean, I don't know. Maybe some environments. I don't know. Anyways, the environment in general, yes. But here, Yeshua is not speaking of any of that. He's speaking of the fallen nature of man in general, not due to any specific sin. The sin of Adam set the precedent, the principle of death, and this associated destruction in the world. And we, mankind, well, we've had to live it ever since. Thankfully, God gave us the answer, the solution, through Yeshua, all the way back to the first couple who were given the same choice. They made the first error when they did Operation Loincloth, remember? And the Lord said, no, that's not going to work. Here's the way it works. Blood has to be the restitution. Blood. And of course it would be Yeshua's blood ultimately. But this man's blindness was from birth, and it symbolizes the plight of not just the Jews, but the world at large. I mean, the Jews, certainly these Jewish leaders, they were certainly in the dark. They were spiritually blind. And Yeshua is there to give them spiritual sight. So don't miss that. But and the Lord is saying, I've got to do the work while there's day, because night's coming. There's an urgency to the works of God. There's an urgency to your mission. There's an urgency to all of our mission as missionaries to the world, as disciples spreading the gospel, the good news through the lost to the lost and dying world, that world that's in spiritual darkness. By the way, that doesn't mean that there's no light anymore when Yeshua was glorified and went to heaven. I mean, the Holy Spirit came, right? But once he's been glorified, the Holy Spirit continues. I mean, there's still more sheep to bring into the fold. There's still more people to be brought into the family, if you will, the family of God, people who believe through the witness of the Holy Spirit. And that's our jobs. That's our mission. It's our purpose. We take care of our children and our family, our household. As for me and my household, we'll do the will of the Lord. That leads to good citizens, etc., etc. But this is not just another miracle. I mean, no miracle is just another miracle. But here there's a sign, the work of the Father mediated through the Son, that he, the Father, sent to shed light to a world in darkness. Turn to Genesis chapter 2. A little bit more to go, so bear with me. I don't want to stop until I get to a certain point. So, it's funny, on YouTube, I know the algorithms, and the longer the YouTube video is, the less people are prone to go. I know that, and maybe I'll start chopping them up. But it's interesting because I'm also put these up on a platform called BitChute. And BitChute actually gets more hits than YouTube. And I can go live on BitChute too. And it would require some different equipment, which I may do. But it's just funny because, and the reason is